talking about the making of a short film is actually kind of complicated for me because we only started making short films about 2 years ago. So there's still a lot that's really unclear to me about, how we make them. Most of the time, Dylan and I are basing our creative decisions just off of gut feeling.
Usually, the first step is to talk to someone and try to brainstorm some ideas. Once you have all these different scenes and story elements and shots and characters, the next thing to do is just to put all those pieces together and try to find some way to make them work, and then you're already on your way to making your short film.
After we decide on what idea we want to do, the first thing we kind of talk about is the practicality to cool factor, which is essentially like how cheesy does this have to get in order for us to actually like pull this whole thing off. Because on no budget, corners are going to have to get cut somewhere along the line, but depending on the tone, you can really lean into that. Like, on our most recent short, we didn't really have to cut all that many corners because it was so dialogue heavy and based in reality that the only thing we really had to worry about was just getting performances right.
So after we get these collection of random pieces, we put them down into something that's called a storyboard. And basically that's taking the images that you created in your head and drawing them in an order that creates its own story.
When it comes to pre-production, I've found that it's essentially how much work do you want to save yourself down the line?
And I usually like to think of making a movie as making 3 movies. Because you're making the story through drawings, you're writing the story, and you're also filming the movie.
Writing the script requires a lot of concentration for me just because I'm an incredibly slow writer as is. But it's different with screenwriting because it's totally collaborative and it encourages you to explore every avenue even if you don't see something in it. For example, something that you were about to just completely disregard could get adopted by someone else and they'll do something more than you ever could have.
When it comes to the locations and actors and who's going to do what, now I really have to think. Where could this be shot, or who would be best for this role? Who should be operating the camera? Who should be in front of the camera? With everyone I know around my age being in college, it means that Ryan and I are usually the actors in the movie, and we're also the ones behind the camera.
So jobs aren't really a thing for us when we make shorts, and that's just because our operation's like so small. Ideally, we want as many people in front and behind the camera as possible, but since it's just Dylan and I most of the time, we pretty much have to do everything ourselves. And when we do have extra people, it's not as though we're working with actual actors. So what you have to do is you have to find one particular thing someone's good at, and then really lean into it. Like, if someone's funny and charismatic, they'll probably be the main character of the movie. And if someone's shy, or they just can't act, or anything like that, they'll just have a small role, maybe passerby or number 1 or something. But it's still helpful because having as many faces in the movie is really helpful to just build the world out and just kind of make the movie feel a little higher production and real.
When dealing with locations, I find that it's easier to just convert a part of your house or your garage into a set instead of bringing all of your equipment to a public location every single time you want to film. Ryan and I have built a couple of sets just by hanging up black tarps and blankets. That way the camera doesn't show anything that's in the background because that could be distracting for the viewer. The most elaborate set we've done is for our first film called Dead Man. And it was supposed to take place in a graveyard, but obviously we couldn't shoot in a real graveyard. And so we decided to convert the garage by buying these huge table covers and just hanging them up on these wood beams by a string. And we created a box in our garage. So no cars could park there for 2 weeks. And then we got a big blue tarp. We dumped a bunch of leaves on it. It was fall, so people had their bags of leaves on the end of their driveway, so we took their bags. And we dumped out like 16 bags of leaves. Luckily, my friends had a bunch of Halloween decorations, and we had a bunch of gravestones. And that's how we made that set.
Filming the actual movie is the part of the process that I feel I'm most drawn to. As much as I like writing, I've been doing it all my life, and operating the camera and trying to figure out ways of how, framing and lighting and using different lenses can tell a story on its own is something that's just new and still exciting to me. I actually just primarily use like old vintage Canon lenses because they're, cheap if you can find them at a garage sale, and they're primarily just built of glass and metal, so they really are hard to break. Just after we finished our last movie, we got a refurbished light and some cloth for diffusion, so our next movie that we work on is going to heavily focus on lighting. The actual on-set shooting it's of course fun, but it's also really grueling, and it takes a lot longer than we expected to take. But I could probably just chalk that up to a tiny crew and inexperience, really. Speaking of which, on our last movie, we just tried shooting coverage for the first time, which is essentially just filming the entire scene all the way through from every angle. This is so you can cut to any angle at any time while you're editing, so you can have the most flexibility possible, and you can even reconstruct the entire movie after you're done shooting.
So, after you're done filming, it's time for the audio. The audio is pretty basic. We try to record as much as we can while we're at the scene. That way we can get authentic noises and the right amount of reverb, and everything sounds like how it should, and you don't have to do much editing afterward. So sometimes, if you don't get the sounds that you needed on set, what you can do is do something called ADR. So that's basically recording all the dialogue after the fact. For example, our newest film, the first 2 minutes take place in a diner, and there's copyrighted music playing in the background. So we had to strip out all the audio, do ADR. We had to fill in all the sounds of seats moving, or walking noises, and money sounds, and table hitting sounds, and of course all the dialogue was completely redone. And then, after having all the footage and all the audio, it's time to edit. And editing is what originally got me into making short films, because ever since I got my first computer, I've always been interested in creating content in some way or another. Even though I said editing is my favorite part of making the movie, it could definitely be the most time consuming. Sometimes the editing process will take longer than the filming process, and then on top of that, you might have to do reshoots. It's very easy for a film to get stuck in some sort of purgatory when you're editing the film. I also think that editing is one of the most important parts of making a movie, because it's your job to get the pacing of the film, to make sure that the storyboard and the script is following the film. You have to make sure that continuity and audio levels and everything is consistent. This can get difficult sometimes if you have a lot of different tracks and a lot of different layers in your timeline. In some cases, if it's school or a film festival, you might have to just turn in what you have, and even though it's not complete, you just have to turn it in. This has led to some of my films having some plot point issues or something that might be hard to follow. And if you don't have a deadline for your movie, it's very easy to go back and do reshoots and add scenes that weren't originally in the movie or even planned to be in the movie. That way, you think it makes more sense. But every once in a while, something bad will happen.
There have been multiple times now, actually, where all of our weeks and months of hard work have been either lost or almost ruined. Just in our last film, we stored all of our footage on a hard drive that we were editing off of, and I accidentally just knocked it over, not off a shelf or anything, just pivoted and fell on the carpet, and it just stopped working immediately. We tried fixing it, but it's just like walled off in this thing. I mean, you have to like screw into it to get it out, and you could damage all of it. So for all we know, all of our footage is fine in here, but it's locked away. We can't get to it. It would have all been lost if we hadn't copied it onto a separate drive right after we were done shooting. I'm always shocked at just how quickly exhaustion sets in after we're done filming. It only takes about 2 days for the fatigue to start to set in, and it's not like the drive isn't there, it's just that like your body can't really keep up with it. After it's all over though, like it's not really over, because then you have to edit it and revise it and rewatch it and review it, and it's just endless, it seems like.
And some people might wonder, why even make a short film? Ryan and I upload our videos to YouTube, and outside of family and friends, no one watches them. So why make them? Well, it's not about who watches them, it's about the experience of making them. It's about staying creative and facing new challenges and trying to find ways to overcome them. It's the most rewarding thing to have something you have visualized in your head and follow it all the way through to the end into a real life movie. And with each movie, you get better and better at creating those visions. I hope by watching this that you can better appreciate other student short films for the amount of effort they take and the amount of work they put into it and the amount of thought, because every film has a ton of thought put into it.